Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and a very warm welcome to this unusual 116th AGM of FFI. As you all know, this is our very first virtual annual general meeting, and we all know the background to that. I believe we are going to have more than 100 people, maybe more than 120 people online, which is terrific. Thank you all for making the effort to attend. We really appreciate it, and we really appreciate your support. I'm just going to say a few things up front about housekeeping and process. Our timetable will be about an hour, and there won't be any voting. As you know, it can't be interactive, but people have kindly voted in advance. So during the meeting itself, I will go through the results of the voting. And then we'll have presentations on our work and on our report and accounts. And we'll have Q&A at the end with our panel. I'm sure that by now everybody's pretty familiar with Zoom. So forgive me if I'm telling you what you already know, but just as a reminder, you can load your questions in using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And you can also comment as we go through the presentations in the chat function. So we love questions. Please do load them in, and we'll answer as many of them as we can when we get to the Q&A session at the end. And then one technical point, we're all dialing in from different places. Sometimes Wi-Fi lets us down. So if we get a little bit of a wobble, please bear with us, and we'll get it back up again as soon as possible. And fingers crossed, it'll all go smoothly. But just a couple of things to say before I go through the announcements on the voting. We're meeting like this for the reasons that we all know very well. This has been the most extraordinary year with the pandemic. And I would just like to pay tribute up front to the extraordinary work that everybody at FFI and our partners have done. Like everybody else, we had to move to remote working very quickly, and nobody was quite sure how that was going to happen. Nobody knew how things were going to work around the world. And as you'd expect, FFI is nothing if not flexible, if not innovative, and they have really risen to the occasion. FFI has been working throughout, sometimes very differently, sometimes unable to do things where we would like to have done them. And you'll hear much more from that, about that in the presentations later on, and I'm sure you will have questions about what it's been like. But I just wanted to say up front how well everybody has done and how much we've valued the support that we've had from donors, from partners, and from members, which has been terrific. Thank you. If we now move to the formal bit of the meeting, which is relating to the items of business contained in the AGM papers, which you've all received, including biographies of all of the nominees. And we had a total of 60 votes cast this year. And thank you again to those of you who either voted online or sent in your paper forms. So starting with the minutes of the last AGM, these were approved with 59 votes in favour, no votes against, and 1 vote withheld. And we had resolutions following that relating to the reappointment of our auditors, Crowe UK, and those were both approved, with the votes in each case being 58 votes in favour, no votes against, and 2 votes withheld. There are then a number of elections, starting with the elections of vice presidents. Our vice presidents are a wonderful group of people. They are ambassadors for FFI, and in all sorts of different ways, from all sorts of different walks of life, they are a huge support for us, and particularly in the sort of conditions that we're in now. And they have helped us in so many ways, and we're very, very grateful to them for the work that they do for us. There were 4 re-elections, and these have been approved as follows. Baroness Valerie Amos, 53 votes in favour, 4 against, and 3 votes withheld. Dame Judy Dench, 60 votes in favour, no votes against, and no votes withheld. Dr. Lisbeth Rousing, 59 votes in favour, no votes against, and 1 vote withheld. And the Right Honourable Mark Simmons, 54 votes in favour, 4 votes against, and 2 withheld. We then have 4 new nominees also put forward for election for Vice President, and these have also been approved. And I would just like to say, as I'm one of them, I'm very grateful to you for voting. It seems strange to be announcing it. I should hand over to somebody else to go through it, but as you've already voted, we'll skip over what might otherwise be a different formal process. The votes in relation to these 4 appointments are as follows. Sir Roy Anderson, 57 votes in favour, 1 vote against, and 2 votes withheld. Tim Jarvis, 58 votes in favour, no votes against, and 2 votes withheld. Andrew Sykes, 54 votes in favour, 2 votes against, and 4 votes withheld. And Antonio Versace, 49 votes in favour, 5 votes against, and 6 votes withheld. So moving on to the election of officers of council. And the first concerns our new chairman. What I'd like to say, first of all, personally, is having been chairman of FFI for a few years, I'm stepping down with enormous pride and gratitude. You all know as well as I do what an extraordinary organisation this is. And it has been a huge honour and a huge privilege for me to be your chairman. And this year, as in no other, you have seen FFI demonstrate its innate strengths, its ability to deal with all sorts of things and to come up with extraordinary new ways of dealing with unpredictable situations and to focus on making a real difference on the ground. I'm delighted that as a Vice President I can carry on supporting FFI, and I'm looking forward to that. And I'm delighted too that after a very thorough process, looking at both internal and external candidates, the Nominations Committee recommended to Council the election of Hugo van Vredenborg, who has been put forward to you. And you have approved his election with 56 votes in favour, 2 votes against, and 2 votes withheld. And I'm personally delighted that Hugo has agreed to take up the role, and I have absolutely no doubt that he will be a fantastic leader of FFI. We move on to the Vice Chair. Mike Maunder stood down from this role earlier this year and as a trustee prior to taking up his appointment as Executive Director of the Cambridge Conservation Initiative in early May. And we're very grateful, I'm very grateful to Mike for his contribution as a trustee and Vice Chair. But we're very pleased that in his new role as Director of CCI, we will continue to be working very closely with him. Annette Lanyau, who has completed her first 4-year term on Council this year, has been recommended by Council for re-election for a 2nd term in the position of Vice Chair. And that appointment has been approved with 60 votes in favour, no votes against, and no votes withheld. Paul Baldwin is our Treasurer. He was elected in 2017 and he has completed his first term as Treasurer this year. Council recommended his re-election for a 2nd term in that position, and I'm delighted to say that you have approved his election with 59 votes in favour, no votes against, and 1 vote withheld. We then come on to the election of ordinary members of Council. 3 members of Council are retiring this year, each having served 2 4-year terms. Gareth Rhys-Williams, Edward Van Cutsem, and Bhaskar Vera. I'm very grateful to the 3 of them. From different walks of life, with different experience and different expertise, each of them has made an enormous contribution to what we've done. They've supported us, they've challenged us, sometimes they've chivied us, but in every respect, they've shown huge commitment, and we're very grateful to all of them for what they've done for us, and we look forward to remaining in touch with them in the future. We have one trustee who is retiring, but put forward for re-election, Richard Plackett, who chairs our audit committee. And he has been re-elected for a second term with the following votes: 57 votes in favour, 3 votes against, and no votes withheld. Earlier in the year, in March, we co-opted 2 new trustees, and we have put them forward for election, and you have approved as follows: Jeff Bloomberg with 58 votes in favour, 2 against, and no votes withheld, and Benjamin Khalili, 57 votes in favour, 1 vote against, and 2 withheld. And we're very grateful for them joining council in the teeth of the gale, so to speak, and their first council meeting was remote, which was a remarkable experience for them, I'm sure. But the wonders of technology mean that inductions can happen virtually along with everything else. Standing for election for council for the first time is Kimberly Stewart, and council has recommended her for election, and you have approved with 58 votes in favour, no votes against, and 2 votes withheld. That concludes the results of the voting on the AGM items of business, and we come on to the presentations. The first of those is from Matt Walpole, Senior Conservation Director, Regional Programmes, and Matt is going to give us a presentation on FFI's activities and achievements during 2019. Matt, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. It's a real pleasure to be here and to talk a little bit about what FFI has achieved during the last year. So 2019 marked the start of our new 5-year strategic plan that will take FFI to our 120th anniversary in 2023. And our goal in this period is to achieve more than we ever have before. Our focus is on consolidated growth, building on what we do well, where we do it well, investing enough and for as long as is needed to achieve the conservation goals we share with our partners in each of our projects, and to ensure that those gains persist well beyond our involvement. That means, amongst other things, resilient partners, secure and sustainable financing, and projects that are future-proofed to the likely effects of climate change. We've structured our plan this time around 7 ambitions, 4 of which are about the conservation results we're striving to achieve, and 3 are about ourselves and how we will work to be more effective as a conservation charity. At the heart of making all that happen is how we track progress through truly world-class monitoring, evaluation and learning. This is something that FFI has developed over many years and which allows each of our project managers to report annually on progress towards their goals. The annual conservation report is a synthesis of all those individual project reports compiled by our core science team here in Cambridge. The summary of what FFI has achieved with our partners worldwide. My job today is to briefly highlight some of those achievements. Given time, I'm going to focus purely on ambitions 1 to 4. So our first ambition is that by 2023, we will have created the conditions for more than 100 priority focal species to thrive, thereby reducing their risk of extinction. In 2019, we've been working on 91 priority species, of which 75 are showing clear evidence towards more favourable conservation status. So this is me at a time when black rhino numbers in Africa had declined by a staggering 95% through poaching. In the 20 or so years since this photo was taken, the numbers at that time have more than doubled, which is a phenomenal conservation turnaround and success story in which FFI has played a prominent part. Amongst that, our support to Old Pejeta Conservancy has seen it become one of the most significant populations of black rhino in East Africa, with 17 new births in 2019. We're also supporting the only rhino population on community land in Kenya on nearby Sarah Conservancy, which is also seeing new births year on year. But it's not just those big iconic species we help to recover. FFI has long championed the underdog, from hitherto unknown primates in Indochina, like the Tonkin snub-nosed monkey that are returning from the brink, through some of the world's most threatened tree species, such as the wild magnolia, where we can report no losses of the remaining mature trees and a 91% survival rate among seedlings that have been planted by our partners in the forest. and through to the less glamorous but equally threatened Redonda ground lizards in the Caribbean that have increased eightfold in only 18 months since rats were eradicated from the island. Pretty amazing. And of course, alongside those priority species, which we work directly to conserve, many, many more will benefit indirectly from our work to restore and preserve ecosystems, both on land and in the sea. And that's what our second ambition is all about. By 2023, we aim to have improved the status, condition, and resilience of at least 30 priority large-scale terrestrial and marine ecosystems, and the survival of the many thousands of species within them. That ambition rests at the heart of our ongoing efforts to conserve healthy ecosystems, both large and small, where wildlife and people can thrive. So across our portfolio, in 2019, we have helped to conserve almost 48 million hectares, 7 million of which we've worked on directly, and the rest through our influence and support to others. Over 1 million of those 7 million hectares is in marine and coastal areas. Furthermore, we've helped to place some 330,000 hectares under conservation management for the first time, whether through state, private, or local community measures. And it's important to note that those efforts are not solely focused on tropical forests and coral reefs, although those often grab the headlines. For example, we've been working with a partner in Romania to manage species-rich grasslands that are amongst the most threatened habitats in Europe. Whilst in Cambodia, our work to help communities reduce destructive fishing practices in the Korong archipelago seems to be helping to stabilize fish communities, while also helping to support a surprising diversity of seahorses. We not only celebrate success on the ground, but also in the people we support. Our long-term ambition 3 is to see a growing network of local organizations and conservation leaders effectively conserving and restoring species in ecosystems with less help from us. A great deal of our work here involves capacity building, conservation training, or organizational support activities. As part of this, 247 organizations across the full breadth of our partner types received some form of direct capacity development support through organizational strengthening, provision of equipment or infrastructure, training and mentoring, or technical support. This included helping organizations to source their own funds independently from FFI, as well as training partner staff in technical and management skills and supporting our organizational governance processes. Examples include our partner Zamzan in Tajikistan, who support communities to develop conservation-friendly forest-based enterprise, and who are expanding from local beginnings to work across an entire region. And in Cape Verde, our partner, the Mayo Biodiversity Foundation, is now successfully managing its own grants to support local fishers to manage and protect their fishing grounds and all the marine life they hold. Alongside organizational support, over 4,000 people have received conservation training worldwide in 2019. These include partner staff, students, and members of local communities. FFI also nominated the winners of the 2020 Marsh Awards for Terrestrial and Conservation Leadership, which we're delighted to announce here today. The award for Terrestrial Conservation Leadership has been won by Ravinda Kaur, a PhD student from Malaysia, who works to conserve hornbills and other important species across the country. Together with a dedicated local team, she is locating and monitoring important nesting sites and also boosting the chances of nesting success with the development and installation of carefully designed artificial nest boxes. The Marine Conservation Leadership Award was granted to the Mayo Biodiversity Foundation that I've already mentioned, FFI's partner on the island of Mayo in Cape Verde. FMB, as they're known, is celebrating its 10th anniversary this year, and over the past decade has shown again and again how success can be achieved by coming together for a joint cause. Congratulations to the winners of the Marsh 2020 Awards. Our fourth ambition is that by 2023, we'll have influenced positively the decisions, policies, and actions of those with a broader influence on the survival of species and ecosystems. This goes beyond the places where we're working with partners on species and habitat-based conservation. In 2019, we helped to develop 25 laws and regulations while positively influencing 78 policies in various contexts around the world. Our work on microplastic pollution, so impactful in the UK regulation in recent years, is something we've begun to take globally, with pilot work in a number of countries where we have projects affected by marine plastic pollution. We've also been raising our voice on this issue internationally through the influential No Time to Waste report, which highlighted the growing crisis of plastic waste in developing countries. And equally, across 60 of our projects, we've been engaging with the private sector, from local businesses to multinational corporate decision makers, with companies signing up to decarbonisation targets and net positive biodiversity impact strategies across mining, oil and gas, and food and agriculture sectors. So that's a snapshot of 2019, before the current pandemic crisis emerged. 2020 has already been a fairly unusual and challenging year, and like everyone, we're having to adapt our plans and our expectations. Nevertheless, our teams have found ways to carry on and continue to achieve conservation results, and we'll be investing more in that as we strengthen our capacity in key places and in particular areas of expertise. But as we work to weather the current storm, we're conscious that our partners around the world are far more vulnerable than we are to the impacts of the current crisis. To that end, we've been fortunate to be able to establish a partner crisis support fund, which in the past few months has provided over $1.5 million to support more than 20 of our most vulnerable partners worldwide, to help them to continue to survive and to do what they do so well, whilst responding to the increased pressures that have emerged. This has been made possible through the generous support of Arcadia, the People's Postcode Lottery, the Versace family, ARM, the Waterloo Foundation, and the great response from our members to the appeal that we've recently put out. And a big thank you to everybody for your support to this. It's been critical to all our partners as we've been going forward through this time. And as we look forward, we'll be channeling more of our efforts into helping our partners adapt to new realities and to become more resilient in the face of an increasingly uncertain world. We will also be investing in some major new landscape initiatives that we look forward to telling you about, along with new strategic partnerships that will help take our work and our messages to new heights. That's all from me. Just to say thank you to everybody for all your support, to all the work that FFI has been able to achieve over the course of the past year. Thank you, and back to Andrew.
Matt, thank you very much indeed. I'm sure people will have lots of questions about your presentation. So just a reminder, the Q&A button there at the bottom of the screen, just type in your questions and we'll pick them up after the next presentation, which is from Paul Baldwin, our treasurer, who's going to talk about the 2019 accounts. Paul.
Many thanks, Andrew, and good evening, everyone. As is traditional, I'd like to give you a brief overview of the 2019 annual report and accounts. Copies of the full annual report can be downloaded from our website using the link given in your papers. The accounts include a strategic report on our progress against the 7 ambitions set out in our new 2019 to 2023 business plan. It explains how we work in genuine partnership with local communities and organisations, respecting their knowledge and understanding of the local context, whilst bringing our own expertise and experience to the table. As in previous years, the annual report describes our structure, our governance and management, key policies, our fundraising approach, and principal risks. It also shows where we work. FFI has over 130 projects in close to 40 countries around the world. The strategic report provides highlights and case studies, but further in-depth information on the impact we've achieved is in our 2019 conservation report, which is also available on our website. Our annual report outlines our plans for the future. As Matt has already mentioned, 2019 was a watershed year for FFI as we initiated our new 5-year strategic plan. This plan articulates our ambitions to achieve greater, demonstrable, and lasting conservation impact worldwide. Our new strategy builds on our previous 4 aims and expands them into new ambitions. We are now looking to consolidate our efforts around key themes and geographies, whilst remaining responsive to emerging opportunities to support, influence, and innovate. We are also looking to invest in FFI's effectiveness and resilience by increasing our visibility, investing in our people, and securing the resources we need to deliver our strategy. Turning to the numbers, our total income for 2019 was just over £23 million, of which 18.6 million is restricted and 4.6 million is unrestricted. Overall, this represents a 22% increase on income compared to 2018, with unrestricted income being 80% higher than the previous year. The key reason for this increase was the receipt of a substantial legacy of $2.75 million in the US from the estate of Mr. Albert Woolridge. He chose to bequeath this sum to FFI after seeking advice from our Vice President, Sir David Attenborough. An increase in government and multilateral funding contributed to the 13% increase in restricted income compared to 2018, with a large portion of this coming from US federal funders. As always, we're extremely grateful for the continued support from all of our donors and supporters. As mentioned earlier, 2019 represented the first year of our new 5-year business plan. Ambition 5 to 7 will see continued investment being made to increase our effectiveness, including increasing our visibility, enabling us to secure the resources we need to improve the financial sustainability of the organisation and to invest in our people. Unrestricted income has grown to 20% of total. However, this is largely due to the previously mentioned legacy received in the US. Historically, unrestricted income has been quite low as a percentage of total, and this has created challenges as we try to manage our global operations, build reserves, and invest in the future growth of the organisation. We will continue to prioritise key areas for investment, such as communications, legal support, and human resources, all of which are necessary to achieve our business plan objectives. But overall, our core costs remain modest against total income, and this reflects our cautious approach to investing in the organisation as we grow. This next graph shows our different sources of income. Governments and multilaterals increased from 23% to 30% of total, but remained within our revised internal target. We constrain this source of income because although government grants allow us to move up to scale, they can be costly in terms of compliance and overheads, and often require co-financing. Legacy income has increased from 2% to 10% of total, again due to the aforementioned legacy received in the US. This has resulted in income from individuals and trusts and foundations decreasing in percentage terms from 2018. However, in both cases, income remained more or less the same in absolute terms. Expenditure on charitable activities remains a very high proportion of total at around 94%. Indeed, charitable activities have represented between 94 and 95% of total expenditure throughout the previous business plan period. This graph shows the split of charitable expenditure by region and for our cross-cutting work in conservation partnerships. Asia Pacific is still the largest region by spend and headcount. Africa has been growing over the past few years, with Liberia quickly becoming one of our largest country programs. Conservation partnerships in the other regions remain relatively steady as a proportion of the portfolio. Overall, the total surplus in 2019 was £510,000, comprising just over 1.3 million in unrestricted surplus and an 872,000 restricted deficit. This restricted deficit represents the expenditure in 2019 of restricted funds which were received in advance in prior years. Total reserves at the end of 2019 were £16.8 million, up from 16.2 million the previous year. Unrestricted reserves were £4.7 million. This represents 10.2 months of budgeted recurring core costs. Our target is for 12 months, so we're at comfortable levels of reserves, but it should be remembered that unrestricted reserves are critical to ensure FFI is able to weather the kind of storms such as the current global COVID pandemic, whilst continuing to deliver conservation for the future. In summary, This has been another extremely successful year financially. For this, I take no credit. This success is built upon the wonderful generosity of all of our donors and the belief they put in us to use their funds effectively. But these results are also testament to the hard work and commitment of all of our people. And I'd also like to thank them once again for their superb achievements. I'll close by recommending the annual report and accounts to our members, and thank you for joining us at our AGM.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. And I'm sure people will have questions on the accounts as well as on our conservation work. We're now having a Q&A session. So we've got a number of questions that have already come in, and I will parcel them up together. We have a couple on partners that I'd like to kick off with. And there are two, one from Barnaby Briggs. Working with local partners across the world is clearly a brilliant way of working. What are the key things they want the most help with? And along with that question, do you choose projects where there is an effective local partner, or do you set one up, or is it a mixture of both? So Mark or Matt, which one of you would like to respond?
Shall I come on? I'll deal with the second one if Matt, you want to deal with the first one. Or does Joe want to deal with the first one?
That's fine, Mark. I guess the answer to that is it's a whole myriad of things, and it really does vary from context to context. We find ourselves working with partners on everything from support to fundraising and access to donors through to technical capacity in the delivery of conservation work, where we're often standing side by side with our partners, through to help in organizational resilience. And I guess that is a real theme right now, is how do you help organizations to weather the inevitable storms as well as the truly unexpected storms like the one that we're currently passing through worldwide. And that comes down to management capacity, systems and processes, financial prudence, and governance and leadership. So it really depends on the context, but we do pride ourselves on working with partners to understand their needs and really to respond to those as effectively as we can, whether it's bringing in our own staff or whether we start to work with others to help deliver and achieve that.
And the second part was about choosing our partners and choosing our project. Well, we pride ourselves on the fact that we work to local need. So partners normally come to us with a project, and then we ascertain whether it's a project that is it meets our criteria, is viable, and if it does meet all the filters that we put it through, then we will go back to that partner and start to develop that project. However, it might be that that partner is the wrong partner to develop that project with, and often we've either brought in other partners at that point who are more relevant, or brought in others to assist as well. So it's very much we work to local needs. We're there to assist people to deliver their own aspirations, and if they're not quite sure what their own aspirations are, often we help them work out what they might be.
Thank you both. Now, there's a lot of focus on COVID, and we've been joined on screen by Joe Elliott, our Senior Conservation Director for Conservation Partnerships. And there's a question here, Joe, that goes to the question of the wildlife trade. There's a lot of focus placed on the wildlife trade, particularly wet markets, as a potential source of COVID-19. Do you think this is a distraction from the fact that increased urbanization of habitats by humans is forcing species that would not normally interact to live together, exacerbating the potential risk of zoonotic diseases?
Yes, it is a distraction. So we've got a pretty comprehensive policy out for anyone who's particularly interested in this question. We are not pointing fingers exclusively at wet markets. From our point of view, the bigger question is much more one of space for wildlife. Though obviously there are issues in how wild meat is harvested, traded, and so on that do need to be addressed. They need to be addressed through international market restrictions. but probably more importantly through improvement of local regulations, health and safety implementation, and all those sorts of questions. But for us, the much bigger light that has been shone by the COVID crisis in terms of IWT is the need to ensure that there is space for nature. And that's our primary function in our ambition to really ensuring that habitats are in place.
Thank you, Jo. Moving on to another thing that really goes to the question of COVID and its impact. Clearly, this question, several of your projects take place overseas. What challenges does the charity expect to face in carrying out conservation work abroad, ensuring the safety of both the project teams and the local people? And what action are you taking to mitigate the risks involved? Clearly, it's been an extraordinarily challenging time and you've got a lot of direct experience to talk about. Who would like to kick off on that one? Matt, do you want to start?
So I think if we're talking about the current crisis, then of course, yes, we have a long history of working worldwide, and wherever we have our own branches and our own teams, we've got people who have significant experience of working in those localities, and the majority of those are from those countries or regions. And that obviously is incredibly valuable in understanding the context, the risks, and how to mitigate them. But we've worked very hard from the minute that this pandemic hit to work with all our teams worldwide to help them assess the risks, to help ensure that they are well prepared to deal with what is happening locally. So each country we work in has gone through a different journey through this pandemic, and obviously our teams need to respond to what governments are saying, but they also need to be able to keep their staff safe. So we've made sure we've put in place contingency plans, emergency response plans, and we've kept up a very, very regular communication with headquarters to ensure that if there are things happening that need support from here, that we can deliver on that. But the key thing absolutely is being aware, being alert, using local experience, and not taking risks.
Thank you. There are some questions here about broader, what you might call macro impacts. And a question from Justin Mundy. FFI works in many countries that are both highly indebted and which have suffered from a collapse in tourism revenue. To what extent has this increased the fragility of protected areas and countries' willingness to commit to 3030? Mark, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, certainly. Well, thank you, Justin, for the question. I mean, it's massively impacted wherever you've got conservation, which is predominantly based on tourism revenues. This has had a big impact. We launched a fund straight away, and I'd like to thank those donors who allowed us to repurpose their money into that fund to help local communities, to help our local partners. But really, it's going to need a massive amount of money to do this on the scale it needs to be done, to transition out some of these local communities, local partners from sole sources of income into other revenue generation streams. And that's going to demand action on all countries who can afford to do it.
Thank you. And a more specific question then around particular sectors, which I think is probably one for Jo. Given the green stimulus packages currently being offered by a multitude of national governments and the EU as part of COVID recovery packages, and the impact this has had upon expediting the energy transition, will FFI's corporate engagement seek to support and enable this move away from oil and gas toward renewables? It's a question from John T. Knox.
Thank you, John T. Absolutely. This is at the heart of our work with corporate partners going forwards. We've got a strong position ourselves now on how we work with the oil and gas sector. There's all sorts of hoops that our partners are having to jump through in terms of their commitment to transition, and we are working closely with them on figuring out the transition process, but also on enabling their buy-in from board level all the way down to operational level, but also with really working directly with partners, but also with all the facilitating collaborations and institutions around the whole nature-based solutions opportunity, and how we're going to deliver the right sort of high quality carbon into the compliance and voluntary markets as they develop in ways that we're anticipating from next year onwards. So this is a massive opportunity, I think, that the crisis has helped accelerate. We are thrilled about the whole move towards purpose-led business. We're coming in wholeheartedly behind it, and frankly, we're quite well. I don't think I'm wrong in saying we're quite astonished and rather pleased at how rapidly some of our key partners are actually taking on the whole ethical side of our work, as opposed to us having to create a business case for doing things sustainably. There actually seems to be a much broader consensus around the planetary emergency and the implications that has for how we're all operating, and about time too. But it's a huge opportunity for all of us, and we need to build the collaborations to turn all of that into a really nature positive pathway forwards.
Thank you, Jo. Paul, a question for you, a technical question from Phyllis Andrei, who has very kindly left a substantial sum in her will, which she hopes will be really useful. But she'd like you please to clarify the difference, which I think is a very important difference that isn't totally well understood outside the charity sector, the difference between restricted and unrestricted funds.
Thank you, Andrew. And Phyllis, thank you so much for remembering us in your will. It really is very much appreciated. And yes, it will be really useful. So thank you for that. The difference between restricted and unrestricted is when a donor gives us money that is earmarked for a very specific project or a very specific use, then we as a charity have to restrict those funds for use for that project or use only. And typically the money we receive from our government grants or some of the larger trusts and foundations tends to be of that nature. It's for one specific use only, and we need to account for it in those purposes. Conversely, most of the money we receive from legacies and from individual gifts from our members and others tends to be unrestricted. And what that means is it's left to FFI's discretion to spend the money where it deems it's going to be most effective and have the most impact for conservation. So that's the difference between restricted and unrestricted. I hope that answers your question, but thank you again so much for thinking of us in your will.
Paul, thank you, and thank you, Phyllis. I have something here that is not a question. It's a very nice comment from Roger Cottis. Skye and Lochalsh, I hope I pronounced that correctly, Skye and Lochalsh Environment Forum and South Skye Seas Initiative would like to thank Kerry Whiteside for her unstinting support, help and advice in delivering our project. Roger, that's very nice of you. Thank you.
Much deserved.
And well deserved. Something about the question that I think will be in many people's minds, if you watched David Attenborough on the television last night or the night before, that very, very compelling program. I think two questions for the panel, and perhaps each of you would like to have a go at these. One is a very direct question about that program, which is, having watched the program, I want to know more about what I can do to mitigate the threats to biodiversity. And the other question is really about changing views. How can FFI and other environmental groups get their important messages of change across to the unconvinced, the climate deniers, politicians and big business? So, Jo, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, so in terms of what you can do as an individual, obviously one of the most, well, you're already doing something by attending FFI's AGM and supporting FFI. You're definitely making a difference, but I'm afraid that's not alone enough. You've also got to, in your own workplace, in your own home, in the way that you use your time, and in your own communities, everything each of us does counts now. So, you know, and I don't need to tell anyone that. We're all, I think, trying to encourage our own children and families and friends to kind of follow this pathway towards ensuring that what we buy, what we eat, who we support, where we work, are all just trying to build a sustainable platform. And I do think what COVID has shown all of us, as we're often reminding ourselves, is that we can travel less, we can staycation, we can you know, work effectively. Well, most of us can work very effectively without needing to do as much commuting or as much traveling. So all of these things are lessons that we are now at FFI trying to build into the way that we work as well. And what was the other question, Andrew? Maybe I'll let someone else answer the second part, because I've had a good go at the first one.
That's a great go at the first part. I think just to, one was, what can we do personally? What can we do to mitigate the threats to biodiversity? And the other was, how can we actually get our message of change across to the unconvinced, the climate deniers, the political sphere, and corporations? Matt, do you want to have a next crack at this before I then hand it to Mark?
More than happy to try, Andrew. So if you ask me, it's not about starting with the climate deniers. You know, I think there will be people who will never be convinced, and I suspect climate is not the issue for them, and certainly the science is not the issue. It will be around a political point of view. However, there is an enormous middle ground of people who may not be fully aware of what they can do differently, and who, with, you know, a little bit of exposure and a little bit of inspiration, you know, could change, as Joe's been saying, their own behaviours, but also the way they use their individual voice to influence others. I think for the community, the conservation community within which FFI is a part, it's also about how we work with those with louder voices and longer reach. And that, you know, obviously brings in governments, it brings in those who are working with business, it brings in influencers. We are fabulously fortunate to have an extraordinary influence in Sir David, being a long-time friend and champion of FFI and of the things that we hold dear. We can go way beyond that. And one of the things that within our strategy for this 5-year period, we have recognized is that there is something for FFI to do in terms of raising our voice and influence by working with others, because it won't be enough to simply focus on what we and our members themselves can do, but it's how we demonstrate and influence a far greater constituency worldwide that hopefully then will balance the scales of the climate deniers and others who it may just be tougher to reach.
Thank you, Matt. Mark, has it all been said, or what would you like to add?
Well, I think I could add a little bit to that. I think we are, you know, it is, I think everybody recognises, well, most people recognise that it's now or never. We're at a sort of critical time in the history of the planet. We're seeing every day the impacts and effects of our mismanagement, and I think that's obvious to most. Matt is right and Joe is right. We've got some great communicators now, and they've been unleashed, and we're seeing the impact of that. But also from our own perspective, what we're doing just before the UN General Assembly is helping to get the voices of over 100 different local organisations, those organisations who are at the sharp end, heard in the UN General Assembly. And what they will be asking for is a balancing up of the balance sheet so that we put nature first. And I think there's never been a better time to do that.
I think that's absolutely right. If I could add one thing that I thought about a lot in looking at, in listening to Sir David and watching the programme, I think that we can all do things about waste. We can all do things about consumption, and those at the personal level make a difference, as well as supporting organisations like FFI, which all of our wonderful members and donors do. At, I think, the corporate and political level, there's a really difficult challenge, which is to get the the way that we measure growth and the way we measure value to change. That when you chop down a tree, that's pure profit, and nobody recognizes the value of the tree before you chop it down. And that balance sheet for the planet, I think, will be one of the major philosophical and economic policy challenges to get this right. And if anybody's got any ideas, I think we probably haven't got a very fertile ground in the White House right now, but who knows? If we could find a few economics and political thinkers to change the way we think about things. And FFI has done some work on natural capital in the past, and I think that's really important as well.
And we're engaging with the Das Gupta review as well, Andrew. So there is UK initiative around this one that hopefully will produce some policy adjustments that support that. Thank
you. So I think then some questions about what does the future hold? And I think the first here is, as you look ahead, what do you think the impact of COVID-19 on conservation will be? And indeed, as you look at what we are doing, will it change the way we work? Mark, do you want to kick off on that?
Yeah, I think I already mentioned wherever you've got conservation funded by tourism, that's what's happening now with COVID has dramatically impacted on that. And that will continue. On the plus side, we've seen, because of a lot of these sites needed to recover anyway, we've actually seen some biodiversity coming back as well. So there is a plus to it, but overwhelmingly there's a negative to it. And we're going to have to take that into consideration when we're looking at rebalancing the balance sheet.
Thank you. Joe.
No, I just wanted to add that I think what we are going to see, I know the super year for biodiversity is effectively being postponed to 2021, but I think we are at the end of this month going to see at the UN General Assembly and the Biodiversity Summit that Mark mentioned before, we're going to see a big push for a leader's pledge to restore nature. And I think you will see us and many other organisations coming in behind that over the course of the coming year to really try and secure some policy adjustments that come in right behind the biodiversity conservation agenda. So I think, you know, COVID's been a terrible time for so many people, and for our partner organisations, many are still suffering and actually are feeling they won't see a recovery much before 2022 or beyond. But in terms of bringing attention to the need to bring nature back into the centre place, I think we're going to see a real year of opportunity ahead of us.
Thank you. Then a financial question, or a fundraising question, really. This is an extraordinarily challenging time financially. The question specifically is, given how the UK economy has been affected, and I suppose not just the UK economy, but the global economy, by the pandemic, particularly hitting the disposable income of many individuals who might previously have donated to FFI. How do you look at the prospects for raising funds required for FFI in future? Do you want to get our head of fundraising onto the screen, or Mark, do you want to respond to that one?
I'm happy to respond to that one. I mean, obviously we're going to have to work harder. So far, our income streams haven't been affected too much. And that's because a lot of regular donors were very flexible in repurposing money, allowing us to be as flexible as we possibly could. And we've also seen a growth in income as well. But that's because we've got a very hybridized income stream. A lot of charities rely on events and fundraising in the streets, personal contact. And of course, they've been hit the hardest. We haven't suffered yet, but you know, we're kicking the tires all the time, looking at our operation and ensuring that we're sound, and we'll continue to do that while stepping up our investment. As you can see from Paul's diagram, we're only spending 6% on fundraising at the moment. I would say that we could spend more, and we're going to have to spend more in the future in order to ensure our survival.
Very much. I think we've covered all the questions. Forgive me if I've skipped over any. If I have, please send them in, and our team will respond. If you send them to Laura, who sent you the succession of invitations to remind you to attend the AGM, she'll ensure that we field your questions and respond. Mark, is there anything you wanted to say to sum up?
Not so much to sum up, but firstly, I would like to thank everyone who's joined us today. It's really great having you with us this evening. And you've heard about the critical time for conservation. You hear it every day on the screen and in the media. So we're not the only ones talking about it. And so your continued support is more vital than ever. So a big thank you from us all on that. But what I wanted to go on to say is that certainly we couldn't complete this AGM without saying a few words about Andrew. Andrew joined the board in 2005 as treasurer. It will come as no surprise for people who know Andrew to hear that he was quickly promoted to chairman by 2007. And what's more remarkable is the fact that I introduced Andrew to FFI in the first place, as he was my mentor. In his spare time, he mentored CEOs of NGOs, and I was one of them, very fortunate to be one of them. And I recognized in him there was what FFI needed. He also recognized the fact that the problems that we were facing and the risk and everything. So a very brave Andrew Sykes stepped into the fore, especially when you consider that in those days we were only half the size of the organisation we are today, but we were growing rapidly, and we needed not only to secure funds but also recover the shortfalls. I think, if my memory serves me well, we were about 1 million adrift at the time when you joined us, maybe 1.5 million. During his period, Andrew has successfully steered the ship through stormy seas, choppy waters, and into the relative calm and successful shores of today. His cool, steady, and sound judgment have been hallmarks of his tenure with us, and I will be forever grateful for his personal guidance and friendship. It's widely recognised that the relationship between the chairman and CEO is paramount within an organisation, and I can honestly testify to the relationship that we have has been, I think, one of the best. Andrew, I feel privileged and indeed proud to have worked with you during such a pivotal stage in FFI's history, and I know this sentiment will be echoed by our president, vice presidents, trustees, and staff alike. Andrew, thank you for your commitment and dedication during this period. We wish you well, I was going to say in future ventures, but I think we'll just wish you well as becoming a new vice president of FFI, so we won't be seeing the back of you just yet. Thank you so much. And over to you for the last word, which the chairman should always have.
Thank you very much. Yes, the chairman gets the last word, which is very useful. Those are extraordinarily generous words. As I said earlier, I have been incredibly fortunate to be chairman of FFI, fortunate to work with such a wonderful group of people, fortunate to have the incredible support from members and donors and supporters over this last 15 years. It's been the most wonderful chapter in my life. Mark was the first mentee I had, so it was pure serendipity, and
bad luck.
He's said a lot of very nice things, most of which are partially inaccurate. I think the success of FFI owes a huge amount to Mark, to his colleagues, who are unstinting in the work that they have done to build this into the incredibly effective organization that it is today. And it's a very special organization. I'm very honoured to be a vice president. I'm looking forward to continuing to support from the sidelines in future. But I'd like to thank you all. Mark, you thanked me for friendship. I return that. I thank you for yours, and to everybody on the staff and all of the trustees, past and present, and to, of course, all of our wonderful members. That's enough. You know, I'll be crying in a moment. So thank you all very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen. It's been wonderful to have you join us. We hope that our next AGM will not be like this. We hope that we will be standing together at the end of the proceedings with a glass in our hand, able to talk face to face. Whether we meet virtually or face to face, we look forward to meeting you all again. And thank you once more for your huge support. Bye-bye.